Hello, welcome to Caleb's Poetry Corner. I'm back again after missing a week. You know, if you've been watching any of my two other videos, right, you know that I do most of this by feel, right? I'm not interested in kind of like scholarly approaches or kind of wringing all I can out of the poem. I'm just interested in kind of approaching these things for a few moments that I think are really stand out, or the reasons why I love the poem or whatever, however small or large those may be. And so, I was trying to do some videos last week and I just wasn't feeling it for a few different poets. I'm going to come back to them. Terrence Hayes, Bridget Pegeen Kelly, Will Alexander, if any of these names are familiar to you, you might check back here. But I don't know, for whatever reason, I just wasn't feeling it last week. But this one, I'm going to do the Dream Songs, a poem from the Dream Songs by John Berryman. And if you don't know anything about the Dream Songs, I'll give a little history lesson before we get into it. So this book is actually two books in one. It's 77 Dream Songs, which was published in 1964, and then His Toy, His Dream, His Rest, which was published in 68. And then the full Dream Songs published in 69. It won him the Pulitzer Prize, really made Berryman's name. Before that, he had some books. He's kind of known. He was a Yeats disciple. He actually, met Yeats before he died. His poems and The Dispossessed. But I really think Berryman came into his own with Homage to Mistress Bradstreet, which I think is a great book, really kind of underrated. Berryman's one of my favorite poets. He's also from Oklahoma, like me. So it's a good to have poets that we can claim. Though we have several, luckily, right here from Oklahoma. The poem I'm going to be reading today is number 90. And I'm just going to read it and then talk about it, like normal. In the night reaches, dreamed he of better graces, of liberations and beloved faces, such as now ere dawn he sings. It would not be easy, accustomed to these things, to give up the old world, but he could try. Let it all rest. Have a good cry. Let Randall rest, whom your self-torturing cannot restore one instant's good to rest. He's left us now. The panic died, and in the panic's dying, so did my old friend. I'm headed west, also, somehow. In the chambers of the end we'll meet again. I will say Randall, he'll say Pussycat. And all will be as before, when as we sought among the beloved faces imminence, and were dissatisfied with that, and needed more. I love this poem. I love the whole Dream Songs. Is a very complicated, interesting book. There are going to be some things about the Dream Songs that I'm not going to speak about today because it's, over 300 pages of poems, but incredible poetry. So these are at the beginning of His Toy, His Dream, His Rest. This is after 77 Dream Songs. It's number 90. This is the beginning of the book is kind of dedicated to several of Berryman's friends. Poems are dedicated to several of Berryman's friends who have died and passed on, which we'll get to when we get to Randall. But let's start. In the night reaches, dreamed he of better graces, right? It begins, right, in that moment right before dawn, that moment of desolation right before dawn. I don't know if any of you have experienced insomnia like I have, and I imagine a fair number have, but it feels like the worst moment is right before the sun comes up. It feels like maybe the sun won't ever come up then. But it's also a moment where at least in my experience, I'm thinking back in my tiredness of like wanting to go to sleep, or maybe at that point just having given up on sleep and turning towards memory, right? Memory is one of the big occupiers of the insomniac, I think, at least in my experience of insomnia. Beloved faces, liberations. It would not be easy, accustomed to these things, to give up the old world, but he could try. Let it all rest, have a good cry, right? Giving it up, right? Letting it go, right? As the sun rises, a new day, right? Fairly kind of simple imagery, right? But we get more specific in this next stanza, right? And if you want to see, the Dream Songs. Whoa, you can't see it. are often written in these 3 stanzas. That's kind of the form he uses, the actual dream song form. So if you want to, I would say look up some of the poems and try to write your own dream songs, right? They have a few esoteric rules, right? You may notice some patterns, but I would say, a little push towards the people watching this, not just to read poetry, but to try their hand at it, right? Anybody can write a good poem, right? It's possible for anyone. It just takes work a little bit, right? But all great art takes a little bit of work, and that's part of the fun. But let's return to a poem that's not quite fun, I would say, maybe until the end, right? Depending on your view. Let Randall rest, right? Who's the person he's summoning up? Randall Giroux, right? If you're not familiar with his work, he was another poet who is kind of associated with confessional poets, which Berryman was also associated with, of the 50s and 60s, I guess 70s too. But he's kind of an outsider a little bit. He was friends with Berryman. He writes these great poems like The Lost World about specifically elderly women that I think are just so insightful and beautiful and just shows so much strength and restraint and empathy and understanding. Great poems. Also just like a really interesting critic if you're interested in the poetry and literature of the 50s and 60s. Giroux wrote about a lot of it. But him and Berryman were friends, and Giroux committed suicide in 1966, 67, somewhere around there. And he was walking on the side of the road and reportedly jumped in front of a car. So there is some question as to his suicide. All of his friends and everyone thought that was the most likely case. So, yeah, I'm going to refer to Randall's suicide. I hope that doesn't get me like, I said suicide like 20 times in this video. I'm going to get like blocked off YouTube or whatever, but who cares? Whatever. You can't stop me in my poetry. So let Randall rest, whom your self-torturing cannot restore one instant's good to rest. He's left us now, right? All of this conjuring up, all of this necromancy, right? There's good to it, right? There's good in remembering, right? There's good in celebration, in legacy, and all of these different kinds of things, but not in torture, right? Not in keeping yourself awake, trying to summon the dead, right? It's never going to be healthy, and Berryman understands that, right? In this moment, the panic died, and in the panic's dying, so did my old friend. Just one of the most heartbreaking lines, I think, in any poem. The panic dying. God, what a horrific image of death, but also, accurate to perhaps Gerald's mind state and perhaps Berryman's too, who would also go on to commit suicide, jumping off a bridge in Minneapolis where he taught. I'm headed west also somehow, right? I don't really want to kind of touch on that line. I think it speaks for itself. And then we get in this last stanza, which I think is equal parts like hopeful and equal parts kind of sad and resolute, right? In the chambers of the inn, we'll meet again, right? I love the sound of that. In the chambers of the end, we'll meet again, just melodious. I will say Randall, and he will say what? Not John, not you son of a bitch, right? He'll say Pussycat, right? This playful, fun name, and all will be as before, right? Which restores things, right? But when as we sought among the beloved faces imminence and were dissatisfied with that and needed more than what? More than each other, more than the end, more than heaven, more than what, right? Imminence, legacy, all of these things, even in the afterlife, complicating these things, right? Because I don't, maybe Berryman became an optimist, right? But he doesn't seem to me an optimistic fellow, right? Maybe towards the end of his tenure, even though, he committed suicide. I don't know. His changing views, I guess, aren't pertinent to this particular poem. But I just love that Berryman can't leave it, right? He can't leave it as this simple thing because him and his friend weren't simple people. No one is really simple. No one's life is really simple, right? And he can't reduce it. You can't say, well, all will be well, like Julian of Norwich, right? Because it's not that kind of time, right? It's not that kind of place. It's not that kind of poem. And instead, he leaves it. He leaves us with this complicated ending, right? And the poem, comes in the middle of this sequence of poems, right? So isolating it is kind of unfair, right? But that's the nature of some of these books sometimes, right? I kind of prefer that, right? I like to listen to albums. I like to read books of poetry instead of individual poems, right? I want to see how it all kind of comes together and connects, and the power that can be found there, right? And so it kind of done you a disservice by isolating it, but we've spoken about this individual poem. So that's all I have to say about it. You can go and read it yourself. You can make your own conclusions. You can find things that you love about it. Any poems that I talk about, I encourage you to seek out those poets, and especially as I get to more lesser well-known poets, well-known to me and well-beloved by me, but maybe you can discover something new here. Until next time, I've been Caleb, and this is Caleb's Poetry Corner.